I want to talk a little bit about myself and why I'm doing these videos and about my past, I think. Yeah, I think that's what it is. I grew up in Russia from 0 to 6 years old. My mom got separated from my biological father when I was 1. And then she remarried a French diplomat when I was about 5 or 6. We left then to live in San Francisco for 2 years, from 6 to 8. And then from 8 years old to, then it's kind of irrelevant, but then I lived in France. But I think those formative years from 0 to 6, you know how they say like the subconscious forms from 0 to 6 or 0 to 7. I think they really impacted me in big ways. Then I also lived with my mom basically as a single mother because my stepfather wasn't in the picture. My biological father never was. And I think, and her being Russian was like Russian education, and that was incredibly tough for a long time. And I hated my mother for years. Really, I hated myself. I hated like my life. I think I hated everything. I felt so uncomfortable. And I really, really struggled. I felt also very different because I had a very Russian education from my peers, and it really was incredibly isolating. And there was, I just was very alone. And I don't think it was a very healthy environment. It was a very healthy environment in a physical sense, not in a physical, in a physiological sense, but not in a physical sense, because my mom was also violent, and not also in a psychological or emotional sense. I think I was really unsupported. And for years, I grew up like this. And for years, I became an adult and thought that was, you don't know what you don't know. So I have quite a fiery personality. And so I struggled with feeling like I couldn't control myself, feeling like I would only choose wrong partners in my life, feel like something was holding me back. I was unhappy, but yet very proud of myself, although that was a facade, because deep down I was incredibly, incredibly insecure and just really, really struggling. And it took me years of therapy. I'm at this point 6 years in therapy, and I just feel like now I can sort of wind it down a little bit, because for years it was really, really present. But I went to therapy because I hated my mom. And it took me a long time to say these words, and I say them now without like shame, because I've worked through them. But for years, I also hated myself then for hating my mother, but that was really present. I remember I went to therapy, and for the first like little bit of time of therapy, I saw my mom as a huge dragon. That I think is really telling. That like, as one of my therapists pointed out, like when you think of a dragon, you don't think of a small little thing. So the fact that I was saying it was a huge dragon was really telling. But yeah, so I struggled incredibly, and she was so present in my life, even though we barely talked. And every single like kind of interaction that we had at that time, that was probably I mean, 7 years ago or something like that. 8 years ago. I mean, before. Even before that, but yeah. Um, every single interaction that we had would really put me into like rage. My jaw would just tighten so bad. And I just realized at some point that it was not healthy. And I kind of had to cut the bridge a little bit with her, just accept that that was how I was feeling at the time. And because there was no other way. I mean, I just felt horrible interacting with her. But then I met my partner and we moved, and I ended up going to therapy and worked through a lot of stuff. I originally came to therapy because I hated my mother. This is just such a primal thing to say. But then I realized that I wasn't just talking about my mother, and I was having a lot of other things that I never realized. And after a while, I was able to understand something happens, I think, where I think when you have had huge trauma in your life, your brain becomes, I can't speak for everyone, but like my brain became very black and white. I couldn't see a lot of nuances. It was very difficult to see through, to understand that two things could be true at once. So I only saw if I wasn't winning, I was losing. And that kind of thinking of like, it gets kind of into emotion, like makes you have very strong emotional reactions, because then you're fighting for your life every single time. Yeah, it's very hard. So everything was like that. And you know, the way you grew up also has such a huge impact on every single relationship you're gonna have. People will say things like, oh, like, you know, you're a different person at work or whatever, but you carry yourself everywhere. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything, and the way you interact with one person is the way you interact with all people. It doesn't really matter what your relationship or your connection to them is. That will eventually, the pattern will repeat itself, you know, given enough time. So it doesn't really matter who that person is, because it's all about how you feel about it. So it doesn't really matter. It also we have to understand that sometimes also the way we, wow, I don't know what that was. Sometimes the way we act will elicit reactions out of other people. And so you really do reproduce patterns, you know, until we break them. So I guess the way I broke my pattern was, yeah, going to therapy and realizing that when I would talk to my mom and try to get her to kind of admit or understand the depth of despair that I felt as a child, and how bad it was, and how horrible it was, and how I grew up in fear, and how that really informed the way I lived my life. I mean, my mom would come back, you know, home, and we weren't happy to see her. We'd just leave. We were afraid, so we'd just go. We were watching TV or whatever. We knew she'd be pissed, and so we just like, because we should have been doing something, you know, cleaning the house or whatever, something productive. So doing something unproductive, which I realize now is like kind of also that Russian mentality. I mean, I was born in 1990, but my mom and her whole family came from communism, and that kind of like, how can I say, frivolity was not part of, you know, our culture. Everything was utilitarian, and play and frivolity and just, you know, kind of like joy, and it was all not really encouraged or accepted or wanted. So I see that now, you know. So it's like if you're not doing something useful with yourself, if you're just playing, or you can do it, but only you have to earn play, you have to earn pleasure, you have to earn like all these things. And so, yeah, us watching TV as kids was not acceptable because we probably had better things to do. And so, yeah, we would just leave like the living room and pretend we were in our rooms doing something else. I mean, yeah, and so we were just deathly afraid of our mom. I have a brother as well, but that kind of didn't like when I would try to talk to her about how bad it was, about how afraid I was of her, because she was physical also with me. That kind of fear lives with you for a very long time. And if somebody can violate your kind of body physically, that what can I say? You don't feel safe in your body. You don't feel safe in your life. So, and that follows you through because it came as it happened when you were like when I was a child. But when I would try to talk about it with my mom, she could never admit, she could never, probably because it's very hard to admit that, yeah, you fucking fucked up, you know, and you were like horrible. But all she would do was kind of get defensive, which I understand now that, you know, because she would say, like, I did what I could, I was alone, which is all very true, and that's very hard, you know. But of course, that doesn't take her responsibility, but I can kind of hear where she's coming from. At the time, though, when I would try to confront her with it, I couldn't see that side, I couldn't understand. But also, it felt like then my pain was denied. And so it kind of became like impossible because it's like I'm not heard, I'm not able to be understood here because I keep trying to kind of tell you about how you impacted me, but you don't want to hear it. And that person also feels like, I mean, I don't know what that person feels like, but I imagine my mom would feel like that was years ago, you know. Obviously, you know, we can only accept and help someone what we've been through ourselves. Like she can't, you know, it's not something she can realize until she goes through it herself, which was her own pain, also how she was mistreated as a child, but that goes into a separate like kind of bucket. But so I had to cut bridges with her because the whole interactions were making me feel so bad. And when I started therapy, I realized that I was talking a lot of about my mom, but also about other stuff, you know, because it does permeate everything, you know. But after a while, it's interesting that I still need to talk about my mom, clearly. But yeah, I mean, it makes me emotional now. I didn't expect, but like she's my biggest victory in a sense because I was able to how can I say, to heal from her, you know. She was the thing that pushed me to therapy. Wow. She was the growing up in the way that I grew up and dealing with everything that I dealt with was the reason that I ended up in therapy. And you know how you say, like, maybe you'll thank people, you know, even the most horrible thing that someone can do to you, maybe you'll thank them for it because it will push you into a direction, you know. So yeah, I'm just realizing this now. Maybe that's it. But I was able to understand that it wasn't the either or, like either I was abused or I wasn't. Or it was justified, you know. It was I was abused and my mom also had a really hard time. And neither like it doesn't excuse anything. But I wouldn't say it would explain, but these two things can be true, and I can hold my hurt, my pain, even if someone else doesn't acknowledge their part in it. Um, and that, I think, was a very expensive and meaningful lesson, to understand that somebody else doesn't need to recognize how you've suffered, and for you to move on, for you to be able to kind of move on. For years after, like now I'm able to speak to her. I wouldn't say it's a deep relationship, but it is, I don't know, like it is what it is. I think we're just not even that close. I kind of sort of wonder if we can be closer, maybe, but yeah, you know. But anyway, I didn't need her to acknowledge my pain for me to be able to be free from it, because yeah, I mean, it was horrible. And I still see the effects of it now, you know. And it runs incredibly deep, and it has huge ramifications into your life. Yeah, it runs very deep, and it took me a long time to heal from that. But here I am, and I think she really, like, maybe, I don't know, it's crazy to say, maybe she inspired this whole journey, you know. Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like, you know, it's like, I feel like it's like people that have cancer, you know, it's like, then they're really grateful for the cancer. It's like, maybe that's my cancer, but like, maybe that's the thing, you know, that is like pushing me forward. And it's clearly still something that, although I've dealt with a lot of it, I can't say that I've dealt with all of it, but I think I've dealt with the majority of it, and I feel really, really sort of at peace of where that is now. And I've accepted that, you know, she is who she is. I've stopped also trying to change her, and because who am I to say that my way is better, you know? Maybe not everyone can or should, you know, go to therapy, because it was for a while or something. I said you should go. But in reality, I think when we try to put these things on other people, as in, it's because we are refusing to change ourselves. Obviously, it would be easier if my mom had an enlightenment and, you know, decided to go to therapy and realize the effect, and, you know, was willing to hear me out. But really, it's because it's uncomfortable for me to then, because that person is refusing to change, it forces us to change. But that's not a bad thing, because we don't do it for them, we do it for ourselves. And I had to do it for me, you know, because, yeah, because why not? I'm also learning incredibly valuable things here as well, you know. So yeah, so maybe that is the first episode, a little bit about my life and about, you know, what happened, and maybe they can help somebody else to realize that you don't need other people to acknowledge the pain, the hurt, because also they can't. When abuse was so prevalent in your life, I don't believe, because for you it was like a constant torture, and for that person it's like a Tuesday, you know. They can't necessarily, and so kind of, they can't really in any meaningful way kind of go back and address, or they could, but that's not, most likely, if they did it in the first place, it's very unlikely that they'd be able to fully comprehend, understand, and kind of be willing to go on that journey with you, because had they known better, they wouldn't have done it. So it's very unlikely that first of all they remember it, second of all that they can, it's so deep and it's so hard and it's so like, you know, so destroying for you, but for that other person they can never, I think, understand, and therefore they can never fully acknowledge, and they can never fully also apologize therefore for it, because what kind of apology, or yeah, what kind of apology like would suffice to that kind of abuse, you know? There's no apology that can be meaningful enough when you've been through that much pain and suffering. It's unfortunately, it's like, you know, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. Yeah, it sucks, but that's the reality of it, is that there's no amount of apology or ownership that that person can do, because it's too big, it's too deep, it's too monumental. You know, it's like, sorry for beating you up, sorry for, you know, like, it wouldn't really cut it. So yeah, it's unfortunately something that you have to work on yourself to, and it's not about also forgiveness or understanding, it's about acceptance. um Acceptance is like, kind of was like my first step into healing. So accepting that I hated my mom, um accepting that, um I don't know, that I didn't like to party on the weekends, you know. I mean, like, acceptance has been my first step, and acceptance has been my 12,000th step. So yeah, acceptance is truly the way to a peaceful, happy life. um yeah, yeah. So i think I think that's it for this episode. My Yeah, it's unfortunately our responsibility, because we're the ones that feel like shit, and I felt like shit for a long time. And oh, yeah, okay. One more thing I want to say is that even after I started therapy and I was in a wonderful relationship, I have to say that in the middle of that therapy, it did not feel comfortable, and I did not feel happy. And I think I really kind of touched the bottom of the pool, which I thought I had before, but I hadn't. And it made me really think about, like, is this the right thing? Am I like moving in the right direction? And that's really hard when you feel true despair, um, which I did. I did not. How can I put this? I did not want to die, but I didn't want to live. Um, yeah, and that was a difficult moment. Um, wow, yeah, yeah. Because in the middle of it, things felt really, really shitty. So yeah, um, I think that's it. I think I want to talk a little bit more about my story in, like, kind of these episodes. Um, but yeah, I guess my first episode is about my mom, which was my biggest, I don't know, teacher. Oh, one more thing that I want to say about my mom, actually, because wow, yeah, it's a can of worms. Okay, maybe it has to be another episode. Maybe I'm not done talking about my mom. Oh wow, yeah. Okay, Okay then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.